Gonzo Education, Chapter 3, Working Homeless, Part 3. It was great to have my truck back in commission. I had a vehicle and a full-time job, so it wouldn't be long before I had somewhere to live. I still had to sleep in my truck, but I could get around easier compared with taking the bus. Michael was living at Mom's house again, so when Guy wasn't home, I could shit, shower, and grab something to eat. I made a gang of friends at my telemarketing job, and management loved me. After a few weeks, I was the top salesperson. I was always on time and sold more newspaper subscriptions than anyone. At one point, they introduced an Employee of the Month award and gave it to me for 3 months straight before I told them to honor someone else. Most of my coworkers knew I was looking for a place to live. One day I was introduced to a tough little Mexican from Houston named Joby. Joby reminded me of a Latino James Cagney. He was who he was and didn't try to impress anyone. Sometimes he was a few minutes late and you could tell he just got out of bed. The manager would always get on his ass for it because apparently he lived 2 blocks away. Everyone would see Joby walking to work, staring at his shoes with a scowl on his face before the shift. Coworkers turned their heads and looked quickly as they drove by, trying not to be late themselves. I admired his attitude because people are usually phonies at work. One night after our shift, Joby invited me to see his apartment, and I knew I probably had a place to stay. I didn't know him personally, but that's how life works. A stranger will give you a ride, someone will buy you lunch, or you move in with someone you never met before. Everything you think that's set in stone can change in an instant. Joby lived a few blocks from the telemarketing office in San Antonio College District section of town. People in San Antonio call it the SAC district. It's a poor area, and most students who go to San Antonio College don't live anywhere near there. Their student body consists of underachieving slackers from the suburbs of the affluent north side. It's the gay bar part of San Antonio, and there's a homo tavern on every corner. You can't go more than 2 walks without being propositioned by a sickly-looking transvestite or harassed for change by a scab-covered junkie. It's a good place for a young writer because the fringes of society is where you find the best stories. A few college students lived in the neighborhood, but most houses were chock full of addicts and welfare families. The few college kids I met around there were from the same suburbs as their north side peers, but they were a little cooler, drawn to the ghetto and its urban facade. It was the poorest neighborhood I had ever been in. Every building was an ancient, rotting dwelling in dire need of repair. They called it historic, but to me it was just old wood and disease-carrying rats. Just by driving through, you could smell the urine-stained sidewalks and burnt crack without even rolling down your car windows. That's poetry. This is great. After our shift, me and Joey walked to his apartment. I wasn't expecting much, but it was worse than that. The oddly shaped unit was empty besides random slapdash crap Joby had grabbed from street corners. It looked like the house from Fight Club, with metal pipes slowly dripping water, very little light, and bloodstains covering the walls and carpet. The place would have smelled bad enough, but the stench was made worse by Joby's pet ferret, Stinky. The building was 3 stories and over 100 years old. It was built when San Antonio was a border town. Modern construction sliced the once spectacular home into separate, unusually sliced rental units. Each apartment had its own peculiar floor plan, with long hallways that don't go anywhere, uneven ceilings, and rooms of all different sizes. I hung around his house for a few hours, and some of his rowdy friends came over, so I slipped out the back door, sat on the porch, and lit a Marlboro Red cigarette. A few minutes later, a super hot dreadlocked blonde with a dancer's body pulled up on a bicycle. I was surprised to see someone like her in such a ghetto-ass neighborhood, and I immediately knew she'd be an important person in my life. I never broke eye contact. I continued sitting exactly where I was on Joby's stoop, smiled, and politely said, "Hi, my name's Gregory," while extending my hand. The girl looked at me coldly, didn't smile, didn't shake my hand, didn't say a word, just picked up her bike with her toned biceps, lifted it over her head, and went up the stairs to her place. Joby heard the girl go upstairs, came outside, and looked up at her ass. He did this like this was something he did every time she came home. "I'll move in tonight," I told him. The first thing we did was drive to the grocery store. Joby finally had someone to drive an HEB in style. He'd gotten tired of lugging bags of potatoes and rice back on foot, but he said he didn't mind the walking part. "I'll walk at least a mile every day I'm alive." My first few nights that there were shady because Joey would have freaks over to do drugs with him until the sun came up. They were all cokeheads and they convinced me to try the stuff. Even though most of Joey's friends and cousins were gay, they didn't fit the stereotype. His cousins and friends liked to drink in the neighborhood and go to Joby's place for cocaine when the bars closed. One night, I woke up with a huge fruity brute on top of me, ripping my clothes off. The last thing any straight man wants to come in contact with during the middle of the night is a bull queer high on crack. I fought him off, but during the altercation, his friend, who was waiting in the car outside, came in to assist his butt buddy. I found myself wrestling around a piss-stained carpet with two rapists high on crack. I felt like Andy in the Shawshank Redemption. I kept the monsters at bay for a few minutes until Joby woke up. He saw what was going on and gave the situation a look like he'd seen it before. Then he grabbed a baseball bat and started swinging at them. He didn't hit either of them. He didn't look like he was really trying to, but they took off running out the back anyway. The screen door was left swinging, and my roommate and I were left in awkward silence. I'm not staying here if this shit happens again, I told him. Joby scolded me for not fighting back harder than I did. He said he was going to make me tough, like the streets of Houston. I wasn't interested in having the skills necessary to fight off aggressive homosexuals, and rather than not be put in that position to begin with. It was obvious this living situation was temporary, so I kept my eyes open for a way out. I wasn't getting gay much hanging around Joby and his gay friends. They weren't smart, nothing they said was clever, creative, or the least bit intelligent, and I found their lifestyle disgusting. I have a tendency to find the good in every situation, and the best thing about moving in with Joby was the girl who lived upstairs. I found out her name was Lisa, and she hated Joby for the numerous catcalls he'd been giving her since the day her and her boyfriend moved in. I could tell by looking at her that she was a girl I'd like to be friends with. I put on a harder, less genuine facade with Joby's crowd. At first, Lisa only associated me with Joby and figured since I lived with him I was a crack-smoking, crunk-listening goon from Houston like he was. But when she actually gave me a minute of her time, she quickly saw I wasn't anything like that. Lisa was a first-year college student who lived with her older boyfriend, Javier. Javier was a student too, but he'd been going to community college on his parents' money for years without earning enough credits for a degree or a transfer to a university. He'd always drop his classes right in the middle of the semester before grades came out. This prevented him from flunking out and kept his parents sending money. Javier had a nonchalant attitude towards school and his girlfriend. Neither was important, nothing to work for, just convenient. Lisa and Javier were always at an even keel. There weren't any highs or lows, and they never got in any fights. It was far from an up and down roller coaster like most romances. They weren't indifferent, but Javier never got emotional and nothing got under his skin. He wasn't protective of Lisa and let her do what she wanted. Within a couple weeks, Lisa and I were hanging out and smoking weed every day. I didn't spend any time with Javier, but Lisa and I became quick friends. What made it stranger was that Javier wasn't threatened by our relationship and acted like he didn't care in the least. As long as you're happy, he'd tell Lisa. Lisa had a bunch of friends, but Javier didn't hang out with any of them either. Lisa worked the cash register at a Greek restaurant a few blocks away. One day, she told me they were looking for a dishwasher, and I jumped at the chance to spend more time with my new friend. Working at a restaurant with Lisa sounded a lot more fun than calling people to sell them a trivial newspaper subscription. With Lisa's recommendation, the Greek place hired me full time. We told the manager we wanted to work the same shifts, so now we were around each other all day. Even though the restaurant was only a mile away, I'd drive us and take us home in my truck. Lisa acted like she hated to be seen in my truck, but it's where we got to know each other. Some nights we drive around for hours listening to the oldies station on the AM radio and wondering what our lives would be like in the future. I told her if I hadn't become rich and famous by the time I turned 27, then I'd kill myself just like my favorite rock stars. She playfully punched me. What? 27 is still young. It's old, I said. Javier is 27, she defensively said. Okay, I told her. I'll wait till I'm 30. Lisa and I tried to include Javier in our smoke sessions a couple times, but it always felt weird and forced. Lisa, sometimes she'd invite her best friend Elizabeth to the apartment and act like she was trying to hook the two of us up. The three of us would stay up late drinking and smoking. One day I was off from work and driving back to the apartment with a fat bag of weed for Lisa and me. I pulled up to the traffic light in front of the Greek restaurant and saw Lisa busting a table through the window. I couldn't take my eyes off her nipples pressing through her skin-tight blue shirt. I slowed down and waved like a jackass. She saw me from inside the store and waved back. I tried to give her the universal A-OK signal to let her know I scored the weed, but I lost concentration on the road and gently bumped into the car sitting at the light in front of me. A tiny, irate Mexican got out of a 1980s sedan. The backside of his car was a little dented, and I tried to apologize, but the guy didn't speak any English besides curse words. Our lack of communication made things chaotic, with him running in circles while he mispronounced lines he previously heard in English-speaking action movies, and me apologizing in Spanish while awkwardly bowing as if he was from Japan. Lo siento, señor. Lo siento. I refused to get La Policia involved because I just picked up some pot and had traffic warrants all over town. I explained to the furious man that I worked at a restaurant allá and there and pointed to the Greek restaurant. Lisa stopped bussing the table and stared out the window in shock. I told him I'd pay for everything, but insisted on not getting the authorities involved, but the man said he was calling La Policia immediately. I wanted to talk this out, but he wouldn't listen. Finally, I gave him a Demo's business card, promised I'd pay for the damages, got in my truck, and took off before the cops got there. When I got home, I called Lisa at work and told her to look out the window and describe the scene. She said there was an angry Latino stomping all over the pavement in front of the restaurant. He'd moved the dented sedan off the street and into the parking lot. When the cops got there, they grabbed a Mexican busboy from the kitchen and took him outside to translate. I didn't know what to do, so I instinctively parked my truck under a highway underpass and covered it with branches and leaves. I had committed a felony and knew the most practical thing to do was to disguise my identity, cut off most ties, and start a new life on the lam. You don't hear that word too often, lamb, L-A-M. Infatuation makes people do things they normally wouldn't. I love spending time with Lisa, so the next day I went and got my truck and went back to work like the accident never happened. An hour into my shift, a cop came inside Demos during the lunch rush with the Mexican I crashed into. This cop spoke English and Spanish. The three of us argued in the restaurant's dining room like actors in a telenovela. The crowded Greek restaurant diner stopped eating baklava long enough to gawk. It's not every day you see a cop and a fuming Mexican questioning an employee at your favorite lunch spot. Everyone stared with mouths half full of gyro, like I was a criminal. I denied everything. There hadn't been any damage to my truck, so it's his word against mine. After 20 minutes of badgering me to confess, the officer told me to wait at the restaurant while he went back to the station to get his supervisor. As soon as they were out of sight, I told my boss I was leaving and I wasn't coming back. If I would have admitted to it, the cops could have charged me with a Class D felony. I didn't have money for a lawyer, and I knew damn well how the Texas Department of Criminal Justice works. I'd be chained to the system for years. Nobody wants to be classified as a felon for the rest of their life. I was young, but I was smart enough to listen to my gut. When Lisa got home, she called Elizabeth and asked Javier if he'd spend the night at his sister's house. The accident I was in was the main topic of conversation, and I enthusiastically spoke about the ordeal for the girls, displaying my storytelling ability. I'm really proud of this, dude. I'm just really so proud of this. It kind of gives me chills because, like, I spent so much time working on this book, like 5,000 hours. I spent so much time living this. You know, it's really, really great that I really did it. Lisa's friend Elizabeth was attractive, tall, and skinny, with a figure good enough to be a weird-looking model. Raised in a fundamental Christian household, she had like 10 brothers and sisters. Girl had a desire to rebel, and she couldn't have met anyone more suited to help than me. The three of us got drunk and watched the movie California. By the time the credits came on, Elizabeth and I planned a trip to California in her parents' station wagon. I told her I'd sell my truck and we could use the money I got for it on gas, food, cigarettes, and weed. Lisa got jealous and ran upstairs to call Javier while Elizabeth and I fell asleep, drunk. The next morning, Lisa snuck in through the back door and woke us up saying, "I talked to Javier and I'm coming to California too." Lisa looked at Elizabeth directly in the eye and waited for her to respond. The girl took an eternity to say something. "What about Javier?" Elizabeth finally asked. "Is he coming too?" "No, just me," Lisa said. "As long as you guys are cool with it." Elizabeth gave Lisa a look and said, "Sure, we'd love to have you." The next day, the three of us started making plans for the trip. I couldn't believe my luck. A couple months earlier, I was sleeping in a broken-down car in Mom's driveway, and now I was going to California with two gorgeous teen girls. The weekend before we left, we took a drive to the water park in New Braunfels, about an hour away, and somebody started talking about the movie Forrest Gump. "My favorite scene is when Ginny is getting on the bus and Forrest is watching her leave," I said. "I love that scene," Lisa said, "the one with the homemade sign, Berkeley or bus." This was the moment we decided where exactly in California we were going. We had a destination, Berkeley. The original plan was to drive there in Elizabeth's parents' station wagon, but her dad flipped out when he found out his daughter was running off to Cali with some guy avoiding the cops. Elizabeth was an adult, so he couldn't stop her from going, but he could stop her from using the car. We needed money, and I knew if I didn't get the ball rolling, the trip wouldn't happen. Lisa didn't have any money besides her last paycheck, and Elizabeth had an undisclosed amount in a savings account that was for emergency purposes only. I couldn't leave my future. I couldn't leave my future in the hands of two teenage girls, so I decided to sell my truck. I went to most of the low budget car dealerships in the area, but nobody offered me more than $500. The Edelbrook carburetor was worth more than that. I thought about taking it apart piece by piece, and I took a long walk back to the house to think it over. When I got there, I saw Joby had changed the locks, put all my stuff in the trash, and taped a note on the door that said, "Fuck off, Greg." Joby was pissed I didn't tell him about my upcoming trip to Cali, and when he found out, he felt betrayed. He told the neighbors he didn't want anything to do with me or my two female friends. Joby was protecting his ego. Lisa and Elizabeth didn't like him from the start. They refused to even acknowledge the guy. I at least gave him a chance, but the girls didn't bother. He was from a different neighborhood than they were, dressed and smoked in a way that was unfamiliar, and had a personality most white kids are scared of. I didn't get pissed at Joby for kicking me out. It felt kind of relieving. I didn't have anywhere to sleep that night, but I still felt pretty good about my future. Nothing could bring me down. Joby didn't have to put all my stuff in the trash, but sometimes a man has to make a point. I had no money or anywhere to go, but I felt like I had to sell my truck. So I felt like I had to sell my truck. I went back to the dealership before they closed and gave him the keys and the title. When I got back to the apartment, I sat on the stoop with $500 in cash. I was waiting for Lisa to get home, but Javier got back first. He asked if I wanted to come inside, but I told him I'd rather wait out front for his girlfriend. When she finally got back, I told her I sold my truck and she went silent. Lisa always said she hated my truck. She complained about being seen in it, but from the look on her face, I realized she didn't hate it at all. My truck was gone and Elizabeth's father had taken her car. It looked like the only way we were going to California was with a long bus ride. None of us were looking forward to that, and some of the romance I painted for the trip dripped away. We stalled at buying our tickets. I suggested we try hitchhiking. Lisa was down, but Elizabeth refused. Michael called the day before we bought our Greyhound tickets. He said he needed to talk, and I had a feeling of what he was getting at, so I asked Lisa and Elizabeth to come with me to his place. He was staying at Janet and Jonathan's house, working at a pizza place nearby. During the drive there, I let the girls know that Michael had a completely ready and capable vehicle that could get us to California. I told them how we'd driven to Las Vegas for New Year's Eve a year and a half earlier. He'd be down to go on a road trip, I told them. When we got there, Michael immediately laid out his proposition for me and the girls. He'd recently been fired from his pizza delivery job and had some free time. He said he needed a vacation more than anyone and suggested that instead of us forking over a lot of money for bus tickets, we could just pay him to drive us to California in his small car. He said he'd be our personal chauffeur and take us wherever we wanted to go. The only thing he'd ask for in return was that we'd support his weed and cigarette habit for the duration of the trip. Michael made a good argument. He said we wouldn't have to sit on a crowded bus with strangers. We could chill in his Geo, smoke pot, and play our music as loud as we want. You'd have more control, he said. I told Michael to give us a minute, so he left the three of us alone.